Out-of-body experiences occur in most cultures and are documented throughout history. They have been described as feeling like the soul or astral body is extended on an endless cord, which can take flight from the living body. They also often seem to occur in reaction to extreme fear, pain, or other stressful or intolerable situations, like survival strategy, which enables the self to emotionally detach from reality. The violence of war has been known to project the astral self outward from an intense threat, while some women report out-of-body experiences during the physical trauma of childbirth. In some places, shamans and psychics are said to be able to bring an astral projection at will. Here are 5 stunning accounts of out-of-body experiences. Number 5. OBEs in war. There have been many accounts, some anonymous and some by famous figures, such as the writer Ernest Hemingway, from soldiers in the full onslaught of the battlefield experiencing out-of-body experiences. A particularly vivid and later verifiable record is that of a young British medical officer stationed in Clamades, France during World War I. In April 1916, having been alerted to a medical emergency on another airfield, he and a pilot had scrambled aboard a plane and made a hurried takeoff. However, an error by the pilot saw them hurtling downwards, and feeling strangely detached and calm, the young doctor was suddenly looking down on his body on the ground from some 200 feet vertically above it. He had been thrown from the plane and was lying on his back, evidently unconscious, although his mind felt aware and calm. He watched the events from his elevated viewpoint as the uninjured pilot and other officers rushed to his body, and an ambulance started out from the hangar. He then seemed to move with an incredible speed across the countryside to a nearby town, and then towards the open sea. His awe-inspiring journey was suddenly interrupted by a rapid return to his body, which he again observed from above, and then abruptly rejoined as a medical orderly poured some kind of stimulant into his mouth. Later, recounting his story of what he had seen, details were confirmed by the other officers, such as the ambulance breaking down and being restarted with a crank handle, and the orderly stopping the ambulance to rush back to the field hut to collect something he had forgotten. The doctor chose to remain anonymous in case his reputation be later damaged. The doctor went on to achieve great things and also received the Order of the British Empire. Writer Ernest Hemingway was 19 years old when serving with an ambulance unit at the Italian front. On July the 8th, 1918, well after nightfall, a mortar shell loaded with pieces of scrap metal exploded near the trenches, and his legs were torn and damaged by the flying shrapnel. He later recounted to a war correspondent that he felt his soul emerge from his body, like he'd pull a silk handkerchief out of a pocket by one corner. It flew around and then came back and went in again, and I wasn't dead anymore. Hemingway described this experience 10 years later in his novel Farewell to Arms, when his hero, Frederick Henry, feels his soul rush from his body and then returns saying it had all been a mistake to think you just die. Another account from World War II shows how the astral self can help and instruct the suffering physical body. On August 4th, 1944, an explosive-laden armoured tank received a direct hit from a shell, and a British armoured car officer was thrown 6 metres over a wide hedge. As he lay on the ground screaming, with his uniform in flames and in a heightened state of pain and fear, the officer was suddenly aware of existing as 2 persons. One was the helpless victim on the ground, crying and waving wildly, while his second self floated about 20 feet above, observing the horrific incident. He heard his own hysterical cries as if coming from another person, and recalled, "I remember telling myself, "It's no use gibbering like that. Roll over and over to put the flames out." Finally, his physical body did what it was told, and the man rolled under the hedge and into a ditch which was partially filled with water. The flames went out, panic faded, and the officer became one man again. Number 4. Ed Morel. Intolerable pain has sometimes triggered unusually intense out-of-body experiences. In 1909, a man called Ed Morel wrote of his ordeals while serving a life sentence in San Quentin prison in California. During his first years of solitary confinement, he had been falsely accused of hiding guns in the prison, and in an attempt to force him to confess the gun's location, his jailers had enclosed him in what was called the bloody straitjacket. This torture device was a full body wrapping so tight that it created a sense of suffocation, which he described as being like buried alive. The constriction of the jacket caused stabbing pains, spreading numbness and agony as bodily excretions ate into his skin like acid. His first session in the jacket left him in a state of deep despair. However, the second episode was different. As he lay in excruciating pain on the floor of his cell, he felt consciousness slowly leave his physical body and float beyond the prison walls. He experienced a liberating sensation of gliding into the outside world, where he could travel where he chose, enjoying blissful sights and sounds and occasionally observing events which he could later corroborate. When his guards saw Morel relaxed and refreshing following these torture sessions, they redoubled their efforts, lacing a second constricting jacket over the first. However, due to the freedom of his dissociative state, Morel continued to emerge in good spirits. A change of waters led to Morel's reprieve from solitary confinement and subjection to the full-body straitjacket, and his eventual release from San Quentin. His mental survival of 9 years of this torture can be attributed to the ability of his consciousness to transcend and function independently of his physical body. Number 3. The shoe on the ledge. Kimberly Clark Sharp collapsed in the street at the age of 23 due to a heart malfunction, and while strangers attempted to resuscitate her, embarked on what she calls a fantastic journey, visiting the world beyond. Although unconscious and medically dead, she was aware of everything going on around her, as well as experiencing profound insights into the meaning of life. In 1995, Sharp wrote a book titled After the Light, where she describes how her out-of-body experience inspired her to change her life course for a career as a trauma department social worker, and later go on to co-found the Seattle International Association for Near-Death Studies. Her work in the coronary and intensive care units of Harborview Medical Center brought her into contact with many patients who described out-of-body or near-death experiences, and she documented over 1,000 cases in her research. However, one compelling and even evidence-based testimony came from a woman called Maria, who had been resuscitated after a cardiac arrest. Maria excitedly pointed to a corner of the ceiling for where she'd been observing the hospital staff in their attempts to revive her, and told how she had quickly moved outside, describing the emergency room entrance and driveway, which could not be seen from her bed. All of her descriptions of the staff's activities and comings and goings of ambulances were completely accurate. However, she also described seeing a man's dark blue tennis shoe on an upper outside ledge of the hospital, describing it in great detail, including that the lace was tucked under the heel and that it was scuffed where the little toe would be. Although remaining skeptical, Sharp scoured the hospital, going from floor to floor, room to room, and inspecting all window ledges in search of the shoe. She was astonished to finally peer down and spot it on the third floor ledge on the opposite side of the building from Maria's room, and with the lace tucked under the heel as described by her. She could not see any scuffing, but on retrieval of the shoe realised that the scuffed side where the little toe would be was facing outwards into thin air. The nearest building was half a mile away, meaning that Maria would have to have been floating airily out from the ledge in order to see it. Laboratory experiments to study out-of-body experiences had generally not been successful. However, one thing seems clear anecdotally. They are on a continuum with what are called near-death experiences and the dying process itself. On occasion, someone assumed to be deceased, showing no medical signs of life, has literally come back from the dead and reported their experience. Number 2. Dr. George Ritchie. Later to become a psychiatrist and writer, George Ritchie died for 9 minutes while a private in the US Army in 1943. Having completed basic training in Texas, he was about to be transferred to Richmond when he came down with double lobar pneumonia. He suddenly awoke, feeling that he had recovered in his hospital bed, and got out of bed to prepare for his transfer, but to his horror saw that his own grey, lifeless body was still lying in the bed. In a panic, he rushed from the ward, walking straight through an orderly, and in an instant found himself outside and hurtling through the air at an incredible speed. He saw a town below, swoop down and tried to lean against the telephone pole, which he fell through due to his lack of solidity. In the meantime, he'd been pronounced dead, the hospital doctor having found no sign of respiration or heartbeat, and therefore instructing that Ritchie's body be covered with a sheet. Ritchie soon decided that he should return to his body, and he found himself back at the hospital searching the patient's room for his physical self. Eventually, he recognized his body by a fraternity ring he'd been wearing, but was unable to pull the sheet back from his face and realized that he was truly dead. According to Ritchie, the room suddenly filled with a brilliant light, and he sensed a loving presence which made him exuberantly happy. He was gently questioned about his life so far, which flashed before him in pictures, then reported that he seemed to enter another realm, which he later described as a city made of light. An instant later, the brilliant light faded and the hospital walls closed around him. He seemed to fall asleep, later waking up in his physical body, unimpaired but also unhappy to leave the beautiful place he'd just seen. An attendant had noticed the movement under the sheet, and an adrenaline shot had brought Ritchie back to life. Number 1. Donna Can. In 1968, at the age of 2.5, Donna, who had been ill for 7 months, passed away. She was living in the Himalayan foothills where her father was based as an army doctor. When she became lifeless, her mother called her father home from work, but he was unable to revive Donna, all the while crying out to her, "Come back, my small child, come back." As a final resort, he administered a heart stimulant, but Donna appeared gone, the medicine trickling down her cheeks. However, the grieving parents were astonished when Donna opened her eyes and told them that the medicine was bitter. She'd been dead for 15 minutes. When later asked where she'd been, Donna replied, "Far, far away to the stars," and said that she'd seen gardens with fruit trees, streams, and her deceased grandparents. She said that she'd heard her father calling her home, and that she and her grandfather had asked God if she could return. He asked me, "Do you want to go back?" I said I must go back. And down, down, down I came from the stars onto Daddy's bed. When asked what God is like, her reply was one word: blue. 12 years later, Donna and her family moved to Britain, where her story was featured on BBC television. Donna was asked by the program producer to paint what she had seen during her journey to the stars. Others who had experienced similar out-of-body travels recognised the images painted by Donna. After the story was shown on television, her Mrs. Rachel Goldsmith asked if she could see Donna and the pictures again. This was agreed, and when the lady saw the paintings, which had only been shown briefly on television, she said of one of them, "My God, I've been to this place." Mrs. Goldsmith had also had a near-death experience and is positive that she'd been to the places painted by Donna. The two of them discussed the scene and also what was round the bend of the river, and therefore not included in the picture. Donna has since been quoted as saying that in the afterlife she experienced, she felt as if she was everywhere at once and could reach whatever she wanted. Physical objects appeared ethereal and had no substance. There was no source of light, so everything was visible through its own luminescence. Donna said she felt happy existing in this afterlife and returned merely out of a sense of duty.